if you're applying for indefinite leave to remain, also known as ILR or settlement, or you're applying to become British citizen, you may not need to sit the English language test. Yes. So basically, not everyone applying for these applications, either applying for citizenship or applying for settlement, is required to prove their knowledge of English language test. So in today's video, really, I'll be going through the exemptions, those that are exempted, those that need to do the test. But today's video is just in relation to applications for ILR or indefinite leave to remain, as it's known as for settlement, or if you're applying for citizenship. So, but before going ahead, just to say that this video contains information only. It doesn't nowhere represent legal advice. So if you do need legal advice on any of the issues raised, I would strongly suggest you seek advice from a solicitor or immigration practitioner. With that being said, let's just continue with our video. Yeah, so basically, if you're applying for indefinite leave to remain, also known as ILR or settlement, or you're applying to become a British citizen, you may be exempted from having to sit or proving your knowledge of English language test. So in today's video, like I said earlier, I will just be going through the exemptions. So basically, who are exempted from doing this test at the moment, you may ask. So basically, you are exempted from doing this test if you're age 65 and over. So if you're already 65 and over, you're not required to do this test. Or if you have long-term medical or mental health condition, you may be exempted. However, you will have to complete a medical exemption form, with your doctor confirming that, and submit it with your application. There is other exemptions. So there is some people from a country regarded as English-speaking country. So if you come from one of those countries, then you are not required to sit this test. So basically, in terms of the country that are regarded as English-speaking country, they include Bahamas, St. Lucia, Jamaica. So I'm just going to read it out for a minute, and I'll look away from the camera so I can read all of them. Just bear with me. Yeah, like I said earlier, some of the English-speaking countries. So if you're from these countries, you will not be required to prove your knowledge of English language tests, and they include, I'm just going to look away from the camera whilst I read it out. They include Australia, Bahamas, Belize, the British Overseas Territories, Canada, Dominica, Grenada, Guyana, Ireland. This is for citizenship only. Malta, New Zealand, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Trinidad and Tobago, USA. So if you're in the following country, they are regarded as a majority English-speaking countries. So if you're a national of any of this country, then you do not need to prove your knowledge of English language tests when either applying for indefinite leave to remain or citizenship. So for citizenship, these are the only exemption. But in the next few minutes, I'm just going to go through if you're applying for indefinite leave to remain, also known as ILR. There is some exemption. So basically, the exemption includes if you're a spouse of a British citizen. So if you flee domestic violence and you are married to a British citizen, then you do not need to sit this test. I'm just going to look away a bit and go through the other exemptions. If you're applying for indefinite leave to remain, so if you're applying for indefinite leave to remain and you fall into these categories I'm just going to read out now, then you do not need to sit or prove your English language requirement. So I'll also look away from the camera and read it out. So basically, if you're a victim of domestic violence as a partner of or either spouse of a British citizen or someone settled in the UK, so yes, so if you were a victim of domestic violence, you were a spouse of either a British citizen or someone that was settled in the UK, then you're exempted. So you do not need to prove your knowledge of English language test if you're a partner or a spouse of someone who has died and that person was either British citizen or they had settled status, or they were settled in UK. You are exempted. If you were an adult dependent between the age of 18 and 64 of someone who is present and settled in UK and is a refugee or has humanitarian protection, you do not need to sit this test. If you're a refugee living in UK, you are exempted. Someone living in the UK with discretionary leave, so you do not need to sit this test. Someone also living in the UK for which with humanitarian protection. So if you're living in UK with humanitarian protection, you do not need to sit this test or prove your knowledge of English language test. Or someone who has permission to stay in the UK as a retired person of independent means. So if you have permission to settle in the UK as a retired person of independent means, then you do not need to prove your knowledge of English language test when applying for indefinite leave to remain. So this is just exemption applicable to indefinite leave to remain. It does not apply to citizenship. So if you're applying for citizenship, the only exemption will be that if you're 65 and over, or you have long-term medical or mental health condition, or you fall within the countries, the majority English-speaking country, then you will be exempted. So this ones I'm reading out applies specifically to ILR. So I continue, someone who has permission to stay in the UK as a retired person of independent means, I think I've said that already. A Commonwealth citizen on discharge from HM forces, including Gurkhas, those will be exempted. Someone in exceptional circumstances as well. For example, if the applicant is an orphan, widow, or over-age dependent, they may be exempted. Now, having said that, there's other exemptions. So if you're applying to settle on a work visa, you may also be exempted. So I'm just going to read a few of them out. So you may not need to prove your knowledge of English language test if you fall into this category. So for example, you are a skilled worker, tier 2, or you have a tier 2 visa, or you're a representative of an overseas business visa, you're a minister of religion, the tier 2, or international sportsman visa, you do not need to sit or prove your knowledge of English language test. You are an innovator founder visa, you have an innovator founder visa, you do not need to sit this test. Or international agreement visa, if you have that and you're applying for indefinite leave to remain, then you do not to prove your knowledge of English language. Or you're a domestic worker in a private household, you also do not need to prove your knowledge of English language test when applying for indefinite leave to remain. So yeah, that's all the exemption. Aside that, if you're applying for either citizenship or indefinite leave to remain, if you do not fall into any of these categories that I already mentioned, then you will need to sit English language test and pass it at a required level rather. Yeah, if you did not meet any of the criteria, or you didn't fall into the categories of the exemption, those that will be exempted, then yes, when applying for ILR, you are required to pass your test at level B1 for speaking and listening, or have a degree taught in English. So basically, if you do not have a degree taught in English, then you are required to pass your test at level B1 for speaking and listening. If you already have a degree taught in English, if the degree was obtained in this country, then all you need to do is to get a certificate and send it off with your application. But if it is obtained outside UK, then you need to get a confirmation of it from NARIX. They do charge for their service, so do check. In terms of the test centers, Trinity College, do your due diligence check, but Trinity College, you can use them as well. I think they still run the test, and they're one of UKVI approved test centers, so you can use them. But as I said earlier, do your due diligence check as well. Now, do note that when it comes to qualifications like GCSE, A-levels, or NVQs, those are not accepted. So those vocational qualifications are not accepted. And I did say that I will cover whether you can use qualifications that have run out. So basically, some of this qualification, they run out after 2 years. The English language test qualification, whether that be a B1, B2, or C1, C2, some of them do run out after 2 years. So the question here is whether you can use qualification that have run out. So basically, if you're applying for let's start with citizenship. If you're applying for citizenship and your qualification has actually run out, you may be able to reuse it if you've used it with a previous application. So if your qualification is at either B1, B2, C1, C2, and it's run out, so basically the validity is gone now. So basically, you may be able to reuse it if you've used it previously with previous application, like application for indefinite leave to remain, and you're now applying for citizenship. You can be able to reuse it now. But if you're applying for indefinite leave to remain, also known as ILR, you can reuse it if you use it in previous applications. So for example, you use it with application maybe for leave to enter, you're now applying for indefinite leave to remain. You can be able to use it provided that it's still within the recognized list, still on the list of recognized tests. Yeah, so basically do check as well. You do check to make sure that it's still on the current list of recognized tests. Just to recap, when it comes to ILR, whether you can reuse qualification that have run out, so this will be either B1, B2, C1, C2, and if you're applying for ILR, what I've said, you can be able to reuse it if you've used it with previous application. Maybe you use it for application to enter UK and now you're applying for indefinite leave to remain, then you can reuse it provided that that is still within the current list of recognized tests. So you need to check whether that qualification is still within the current list of recognized tests. Yeah, so do check, do your due diligence. When it comes to citizenship, you can reuse it provided that it was used with previous application for ILR. Yeah, so just quickly recap. So can you use qualification that have run out? I said yes, you can use it. So if you've got qualification at B1, B2, C1, C2, if you're applying for citizenship, you may be able, or you can reuse it if you used it with previous application for indefinite leave to remain, also known as ILR, and you're now applying for citizenship, you can reuse it. But if you're applying for indefinite leave to remain, you can also reuse it provided that you use it in previous application. So maybe there might be application to enter UK, you've used it before, then you can reuse it, also provided that that is still within the current list of recognized tests. So this is why I said you need to do your due diligence check to make sure, even if it's run out, that is still, within the current list of recognized tests, to make sure nothing has changed. Yeah, these are the only circumstances that you can reuse a qualification that have run out. So I hope this information has been helpful. Just to quickly recap, this video is all about if you're applying for indefinite leave to remain or citizenship, whether you're required to sit the test. So I did start by going through routes that are exempted, some work visa route that are exempted when applying for indefinite leave to remain. I also went through the categories of other like routes that if you're applying, other visa routes that if you're applying for ILR, that you're actually exempted from having to do the English language test. I've gone through all that, and then also the fact that if you're age 65 or over, you do not need to do this test. If you have long-term medical or mental health condition, you do not need to do the test, provided you complete the exemption form and back it up with an evidence. And I've also, if that doesn't apply to you, then you will be required to prove your English language test, prove that you have qualification at least level B1 for speaking and listening. And if that's not applicable, or that you have a degree that is taught in English, whether if it's in this country, all you need to do is to obtain a certificate and send it off with your application. If it's outside UK, then you then get a confirmation from ethics. They're formerly known as NARIC. They do charge for their service, so do check before you proceed. And also mention that you may be able to use degree, like qualifications that have run out, like B1, if you obtain B1, B2, C1, C2, and they've run out, because most of this qualification lasts for only two years. You may be able to reuse it if you're applying for citizenship. If you've used it for previous application for ILR, then you may be able to reuse it. If you're applying for ILR and you use those qualification for previous application, either leave to enter, you use it and now you're applying for ILR. And also you need to check that it's still within the recognized list of tests. That's the key. So if it's still within the recognized list of tests, then you can reuse it. If it's not, then you probably need to make arrangement to sit another test. I hope this video is helpful. If you've stuck around to this point, do consider sharing it to other people, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for stopping by, and see you next time. Bye bye.